She thought no one would dare question her. Miss Caro had silent students for years, especially girls like Lena Brooks. Quiet, artistic, different. In her classroom, rules were weapons, and Lena's braids became the next target. She humiliated her, dragged her to the nurse's office, and shaved her head clean. A 12-year-old girl, stripped of her dignity in the name of discipline. But when they picked Lena, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know Lena's mother, Camille Brooks, was a decorated Army sergeant, trained to stand against injustice, even when it wore a principal's tie or held a teacher's license. What came next wasn't just justice, it was exposure, a legal battle, a public reckoning, and a movement that would change not just one school, but education law itself. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one girl, it's about all of us. Sunlight filtered through the courthouse blinds, casting long shadows across the silent benches. In that stillness, a mother rose, and behind her, a daughter began to rise too. 12-year-old Lena Brooks didn't speak much in class. She didn't have to. Her drawing said everything she couldn't. While the other kids in 7th grade rushed through worksheets, Lena sketched silent stories in the margins. Birds taking flight, suns hidden behind stormy skies. She was a quiet girl with an old soul. But more than anything, Lena was careful. Every morning, Lena braided her hair with precision. Not for style, but survival. Underneath those careful braids lay the secret she guarded most, a patchy, tender scalp that hadn't held a full head of hair in years. Alopecia areata, the doctor had said when she was just 9. It wouldn't kill her, but it made her feel invisible, and sometimes worse, stared at. Her mother, Sergeant Camille Brooks, had fought hard to get her the medical exemption, doctor's notes, school approvals, hours of paperwork. Then she was deployed. Lena stayed behind with her father, trying her best to carry on. At school, Lena made herself small. She didn't want trouble. Her long, braided extensions were more than hair. They were armor. Each strand was a quiet rebellion, a prayer for normalcy. But the world doesn't always let quiet girls stay hidden. One morning, as sunlight poured through the blinds of room 2B, Lena was finishing a sketch of a swan breaking free from chains. That's when Miss Caro, her algebra teacher, called her name. Loud, sharp, like a whistle slicing through still water. "Lena Brooks," she snapped. "Is that math you're drawing, or just more excuses?" Lena's hand stopped mid-sketch. Her heart skipped. She didn't look up, just stared at the lines on the page, wishing she could disappear into them. Have you ever watched a child freeze, not from guilt but from fear of being seen too closely? In that moment, Lena knew her secret might not stay safe much longer. The room held its breath. And far away, on a base in another time zone, her mother's phone sat silent, unaware of the storm that was beginning to stir back home. The hall outside the nurse's office was empty when Miss Caro pulled Lena by the wrist, her grip too tight for comfort, too cold for care. Lena didn't resist. She just kept her eyes on the floor tiles, counting them like stepping stones away from safety. "She's in violation of the dress code," Miss Caro declared as they entered the small, sterile room. "Hair extensions, disruptive, excessive, unacceptable." Nurse Jensen looked up from her paperwork, caught off guard by the teacher's intensity. Lena stood trembling in the doorway, clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "I have a medical exemption," Lena whispered, barely audible. "My mom filed it before she deployed. You can check the file." Miss Caro crossed her arms. "Already did. Nothing specific, just a generic note. And we can't make exceptions based on hearsay, now can we?" Lena's throat closed. Her hands began to sweat. She looked at Nurse Jensen, silently begging for someone, anyone, to listen. But the nurse, uncertain and hesitant, moved to the cabinet and pulled out electric clippers. "No, please," Lena said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. My hair, I need it." Miss Caro's tone was cool and final. What you need is to follow the rules. And then the clippers buzzed to life. The first braid fell to the floor like a rope cut in silence, then another and another. Each drop felt like a piece of Lena's protection being stripped away. Tears ran down her cheeks, hot and steady, but no one stopped. Not until her scalp lay exposed, vulnerable, raw, naked. Nurse Jensen finally spoke. "That's enough." But it was too late. The damage had already sunk deep into the marrow. Can you imagine being 12 years old and watching pieces of your dignity hit the floor? In the mirror, Lena didn't recognize herself. She looked like a stranger in her own skin. Her reflection wasn't just bald, it was broken. And in that cold, bright room, silence became her only voice. 3 days passed before Sergeant Camille Brooks stepped off the transport plane, her boots touching American soil with purpose. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her uniform still carried the dust of the base. But her eyes, those eyes burned with something far sharper than fatigue. It was 2:17 a.m. when the encrypted message had come through. A grainy video sent by a friend of Lena's, secretly recorded from a trembling phone. It showed her daughter being dragged through a school hallway, her face pale with fear, her braids already falling. Camille had watched it once. Then she started packing. Now, as the sun rose over her small town, she stood in front of the school her daughter once trusted. Her cap was squared, her medals gleamed. She didn't knock, she walked straight through the front entrance. The quiet thud of her boots on tile echoed like distant thunder. Students fell silent. Teachers stepped back. The front desk clerk stammered when she saw Camille's name tag. "Excuse me," Camille said calmly. "I need to speak to Principal Avery, now." The receptionist hesitated, then buzzed the office door. Inside, Principal Avery stood behind his desk, caught between corporate cool and bureaucratic panic. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, his voice trembling just slightly. "We've issued a formal apology and placed a teacher on temporary leave." Camille placed a folder on his desk. Neatly organized medical records, signed exemption forms, dated emails, everything the school had claimed not to have. "I'm not here for an apology," she said, her voice controlled, dangerous in its stillness. "I'm here for accountability." The principal opened the folder, his face paled. Camille didn't sit down. She didn't need to. "What would you have done if you saw your child's pain used as a lesson in obedience?" She stood taller than the walls around her, not because of rank or uniform, but because she was a mother. And mothers, when pushed far enough, become storms. By the time the school sent out a statement, the video had already been shared thousands of times. "An unfortunate disciplinary misunderstanding occurred," it read. "Appropriate action has been taken. We respect the privacy of all involved." No mention of Lena's name. No mention of the clippers. No mention of the tears that soaked her hoodie as she walked silently out of the nurse's office that day. Behind closed doors, Principal Avery met with the district lawyer and Miss Caro. The atmosphere in the office was not one of remorse, but damage control. "She's a military kid," the lawyer said, tapping his pen. "The mother will make noise, but we keep it quiet, issue a 1-day suspension, and move on." Miss Caro, now pale and tightly wound, nodded. "I was just enforcing policy." But the documents Camille had dropped on the desk told a different story. Signed medical exemptions, dated months before, clearly filed. Still, Avery shook his head. "There's no way to prove she saw them. Miscommunication. That's the narrative." They didn't know Camille had already contacted a civil rights attorney, or that Lena's friend, Jasmine, had uploaded a longer version of the video, one that showed the exact moment Lena whispered, "Please call my mom." She filed the forms. That whisper rang louder than any excuse. Outside the school gates, parents began to murmur. Whispers turned to outrage. Reporters circled. But inside the building, the administration clung to its silence like a shield. Have you ever seen a place of learning become a place of hiding? That weekend, Camille sat beside Lena's bed. The child hadn't said more than a handful of words. Her scalp, now bare, was hidden beneath a scarf, but her eyes spoke volumes. "We're not letting them bury this," Camille said softly, holding her daughter's hand, because silence had already cost Lena too much. By Monday morning, the story had broken beyond the borders of their small town. Local news ran the headline: "Middle school teacher shaves student's hair. Mother demands justice." But it was the video, raw and undeniable, that spread like wildfire. One clip, 12 seconds. Lena's tear-streaked face as the first braid fell. People didn't need the full story. They felt it in their gut. By noon, protesters stood outside Bridgestone Middle School holding signs. "Protect our children. Hair is not a distraction. We see you, Lena." Inside their modest home, Camille stood at the kitchen table, surrounded by folders and files. Across from her sat Grace Lynn, a sharp-eyed civil rights attorney known for taking on school discrimination cases and winning. Grace had watched the video 3 times before looking up. "They can call it a misunderstanding," she said, "but what happened to your daughter wasn't a mistake. It was a violation." Camille nodded, jaw tight. "We're suing them." It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. Written down, spoken out loud, held up to the light. That same day, Grace filed a formal complaint with the district, citing medical negligence, emotional abuse, violation of federal disability protections, and more were coming. Former students began to share their own stories. Parents called in. A teacher quietly sent Camille a copy of Lena's exemption form, signed and time-stamped. The school had known. When the news anchor asked Camille during a live interview why she wouldn't settle, she said only one thing: "Because I want my daughter to see what it looks like when we don't back down." Would you have done the same, even if the whole system stood against you? Because sometimes the hardest fights are the ones we fight with no guarantee, but with full heart. And Lena, she was starting to see it. Her mother wasn't just coming home. She was bringing justice with her. The deeper Grace Lynn dug, the darker it got. What began as a single case, one girl, one teacher, started to unravel into something far more disturbing. It was Jasmine, Lena's best friend, who first overheard a substitute teacher mutter that Caro's done worse and always walks away clean. Jasmine told Camille, who told Grace. Grace followed the thread. Within 2 weeks, she uncovered a paper trail buried in plain sight. A district legal fund, quietly maintained by the school board, had paid out settlements for 6 previous complaints involving the same teacher. Everyone involved students of color. None had been made public. But that wasn't all. Emails surfaced, redacted reports, a nurse's log with a missing page, the page that should have documented Lena's visit, the one where she was shaved. A second teacher anonymously admitted she had flagged Miss Carroll's classroom behavior multiple times in internal memos. Those memos had mysteriously never reached the principal's file. Still think this was a misunderstanding. Grace compiled it all. With Camille's permission, she turned it over to The Beacon, a regional newspaper known for investigating corruption. The next Sunday, the front page headline read, "School Board Slush Fund Shielded Staff from Abuse Claims." Names were named, documents were printed. The community exploded. 3 school board members resigned within 48 hours. One tried to blame cancel culture. Another vanished from public view entirely. Protesters returned, this time with more fire, not just parents, but veterans, teachers, past victims. Even retired judges came out of quiet retirement to say, enough. Camille watched it unfold from her living room. She wasn't triumphant. She was tired, but steady. Sometimes it takes the voice of a child to reveal the silence of an institution. She turned to Lena, who was sitting quietly, sketching something she wouldn't let anyone see yet. "People are listening now," Camille said. Lena looked up and asked, "But will they remember?" The courtroom was packed. Reporters shoulder to shoulder, sketch artists flipping pages, and families clutching tissue in their laps. But in the front row, Camille Brooks sat straight-backed in uniform, her hand resting gently over Lena's. The girl wore a soft green head wrap that matched her eyes. She looked small, but unbreakable. Miss Caro sat across the aisle, flanked by two lawyers. Her expression flickered between feigned regret and quiet defiance. The judge entered. The silence that followed was heavy, like the moment before a thunderclap. Grace Lynn rose to speak first. "In this courtroom," she began, "we are not just trying a teacher. We are trying a system that protected her. We are examining the decisions that allowed a child, this child, to be stripped, humiliated, and silenced." Then came the evidence. Video footage, medical documents, the filed exemption, emails, witness statements, former students, and, most hauntingly, a single audio clip. Lena's soft voice, recorded by Jasmine's phone, saying, "Please call my mom, I can't do this." No jury could unhear that. But the moment that froze the room came when Lena took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply told the truth. How she tried to follow the rules, how she begged to be heard, how she stopped speaking, not out of rebellion, but survival. And then she said, "I used to love school. It was my favorite place, until someone decided my hair made me wrong." Elin said dryly, "Can you imagine being 12 and having to teach adults what respect means?" When Grace asked her one final question, "What do you want from this court?" Lena replied, "I want them to know I'm not invisible." The courtroom exhaled. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a head wrap, holding a pencil, and speaking only when it's finally safe to be heard. The verdict came just after noon. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in the sound of collective breath being released, as if justice had finally unclenched its fist. The judge awarded $8 million, 0 cents in damages, to the Brooks family. But the money wasn't what mattered. It was the record, the ruling, the truth. Outside, cameras waited, but Camille didn't give a speech. She just held her daughter's hand and walked silently through the crowd. That night, the governor announced something unexpected, a new bill, the Brooks Student Dignity Act. It would require all schools in the state to train staff on cultural sensitivity, medical privacy, and student dignity. The legislation passed faster than anyone predicted. Soon, other parents came forward, some with stories like Lena's, others with burdens they had never dared to name aloud. Camille didn't turn them away. She created the Brooks Foundation, using part of the settlement to fund legal support and trauma counseling for students across the country. At first, Lena stayed quiet. Then, one Saturday morning, she walked into her old school, not for classes but to see the art room. Mr. Delaney, her former art teacher, had saved a wall just for her. Framed copies of her sketches hung there, fragile, bold, beautiful. The center was the one she'd drawn the day after the shaving. A single braid, floating like a leaf, with the caption written beneath in her own hand. "You can cut the hair, but not the spirit." How often do we forget that children carry the wisdom we've spent a lifetime chasing? Lena looked at her drawing, then she turned to her mom. "Maybe I'll teach art someday," she whispered. Emile smiled. Change doesn't always begin with a crowd. Sometimes it starts with one girl choosing to draw again. 1 year later, the girl who once hid behind her hair stood on a small stage inside a sunlit community center. Her head was bare, by choice now, and she wore a paint-streaked apron and quiet confidence. Around her were rows of children, some in wheelchairs, others wearing headscarves or oversized glasses. All of them carried invisible weights, and all of them were here for Lena's idea. The Strands Project, a weekly art therapy program for students who had been shamed, silenced, or made to feel less than. Today's theme was reclaiming the mirror. Lena picked up a brush, dipped it in a jar of gold paint, and began a broad, sweeping stroke across the canvas. "There's no wrong way to tell your story," she said softly. "Just don't let someone else finish it for you." In the back of the room, Camille watched. She remembered the day Lena stopped speaking, and now here she was, leading, guiding, glowing. Have you ever witnessed a child become her own healing? Lena's story had reached far beyond their town. Her drawings had been featured in the National Gallery. One had even been added to the Smithsonian's collection on student civil rights. The sketchbook, the one that once held her silent screams, was now a historical artifact. But Lena didn't chase the spotlight. She focused on the kids in the room, on the girl who flinched when someone touched her hair, on the boy who hadn't smiled in weeks, on the hush that settled when a child found the courage to paint their truth. Because sometimes legacy isn't in headlines, it's in quiet moments of permission. Lena dipped her brush again, and with every stroke she reminded them, "You are more than what was taken from you." And so was she. ____. True strength is often quiet. It's found in the dignity of those who endure injustice, in the calm persistence of those who fight for what's right, not with noise, but with truth, compassion, and unwavering love. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words, when a child doesn't cry but simply lowers her eyes, and in that small gesture you know something is terribly wrong. In Lena's story, we saw how quiet courage, first from a child, then from a mother, can ripple into something much bigger. It reminds us that justice doesn't always come like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it comes like morning light, soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. We don't all wear uniforms or stand in courtrooms, but we all know what it means to protect someone, to stand up when others sit down, to say, "This isn't right," even when it's hard. Maybe that's the lesson, that doing the right thing isn't always loud or easy, but it's always worth it. And also, if you've ever doubted whether your quiet effort mattered, whether your voice, your care, your presence made a difference, let Lena's story remind you. The smallest stand, taken with love, can change everything. Lena stood in the garden just before sunset, her bare head warmed by the last golden light of day. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply standing, alive, whole, unashamed. That in itself was power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, but changes everything by simply refusing to disappear. Around her, things were beginning to grow again. New laws were being written. New classrooms were being led by teachers who had learned to listen. And in homes across the country, other children, who once felt small, were learning that they too had a right to be seen, protected, and believed. Lena's story was never just about one school or one mistake. It was about dignity, about the cost of silence, and about the strength it takes to speak, even after you've been silenced. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.